Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. May I have your attention, please? Not quite, please. Thank you. All right, so here we go. We're going to continue on looking at the civil rights movement in the United States of America. So have your notes out. Turn to, we're going to go into the notes, prepping you on episode number 3 and what's going to be taking place in the civil rights movement in the years 1960, 1961. And so you've got, what's that on the top of page 2? Yeah, all kinds of interesting things going on there. As you recall where we last left off, we've gotten African-American civil rights leaders have had some success with getting the courts and the presidency to back them up on areas like desegregation of schools, although it's been some tough sledding. And of course, some of the schools have been shut down and there's resistance and all kinds of folks trying to prevent the civil rights movement from achieving its objectives. As we look into this next episode, we're really going to be seeing some continued effort on the part of civil rights leaders to really get things, to kind of refine some of their methods and find out what's being successful and take a look at what kind of things that they want to do. Let's get to, here we go. And we're going to continue. There we go. Eyes on the prize. This one's called Ain't Scared of Your Jails. And the particular focus of this episode is going to look once again at segregation in public areas, in restaurants and stores and public transportation, whether it's a city bus or an interstate bus system. And the folks that are part of the civil rights movement, obviously we've got Martin Luther King Jr. You're going to see him as a key leader in the movement here, and particularly with his style of politics, nonviolent, non-cooperation, using the courts, but also using the news media to try and get the message out to people that their side is the right side, and the people who are continuing to try and use segregation and intimidation are on the wrong side of this particular issue. So this is what's going to be focusing on here. Let's turn our attention to, here we go, there's Martin Luther King Jr. And this fellow right here, James Lawson. We want to talk about him. We got all kinds of figures that are involved in the civil rights movement. So it's not just Martin Luther King Jr. gave a speech and then all of a sudden civil rights happened. No, we're going to need to know lots and lots of ones. So we've got this one in your notes as well. James Lawson. He is going to be particularly involved at this stage in protests, peaceful protests, so-called lunch counter sit-ins. There were a lot of department stores that were open to all number of customers, African Americans, whites, and so forth. But a lot of times in these places, especially in the South, they would have, people would shop and then they get something to eat. This is before your big malls, where you had food courts and so forth. So in these stores, they would have a lunch counter, an area where customers could sit. Well, a lot of them didn't allow for African Americans. I mean, they didn't even have like a separate section. They just like, we're not going to allow it at all. And so, of course, that's segregation. And it's private company. Can they do that? Does the First Amendment allow, right of free association or private association? Or is this not okay? Well, the African American civil rights movement is basically saying this is not okay. So how are they going to do it? Are you gonna like blow the whole place up? And that's not where Martin Luther King Jr. is coming from, and that's not where James Lawson is coming from either. So what they're going to do is you're going to have African American protesters, and oftentimes, as we'll see in this episode, you're going to see like-minded white Americans joining in these protests to show that this isn't just, about African Americans, this is about the whole country. So they're going to be willing to get themselves arrested for violating the rules of the stores that say that they cannot have that. So what are they going to do in response? Well, James Lawson is very interested because he is going to help train protesters on what to expect. If you go in and you have a lunch counter sit-in, you're going to be arrested. And this is what you do when you are arrested. You're going to not resist. You're not going to, you know, hit back against the police and so forth. You want the public, you want the news media covering this event, because you want to make sure the news media is there. You want them to show that you are on the right, that you are behaving positively. They get more and more people to believe that this is just like a wrong policy. And so they do training. You're going to see, beginning in February 1st, 1960, Greensboro, North Carolina, you have a bunch of sit-ins taking place there. 4 blacks refused to leave the white lunch counter. And it's very interesting because sometimes before the police show up, you get crowds of really angry white people, and they beat them up. So what's going to be the response? We'll make sure you have this down. James Lawson and others who are training folks that are going to go into these situations say, hey, look, you're going to be sitting at the counter, okay? Right? You're not supposed to be there. And, you know, the folks that are serving are like, what the heck? You're going to get some really nasty people showing up, and they're going to abuse you. So one of the things James Lawson did is he trained students. And you got these college students. Go ahead and write this down. In the area around Nashville, Tennessee, there were some African-American colleges. And a lot of college students wanted to get, African-American college students wanted to get involved in the civil rights movement and protests. And so they organized these sit-ins, and lots of them did. And so they got these training. And there are some of the young students, college students, that are involved in this and doing workshops. And I mean, they literally will have other people pretend to be obnoxious, rude, abusive people. I mean, like, what are you talking about? Well, take a look at this. This is actually something that did happen, right? So here you've got some of the protesters here, and you get these rude, obnoxious folks that are in support of segregation, and they're taking, you know, ketchup, they're taking the food, and they're just dumping it on their heads, you know, intimidating, being jerks, and so forth. The training is don't fight back. The training is to make these guys look like jerks and their segregated system to look wrong. But you have to be able to stomach it, because I don't know how many of you guys would be able to put yourself in a position like that, where you take the abuse of others when you're in the right and you don't hit back. That was a key thing for Martin Luther King Jr.'s policies, and that was a key thing as well for James Lawson. And so what you would have is you'd have these people getting abused. And then when the police would show up, who would be in trouble? These guys over here who are hitting and punching and pouring stuff on them? No, you would have the student leaders, like here, make sure you write his name down. John Lewis, young African-American college student from the Nashville area, gets involved for the first time here. Diane Lewis, write her name down as well. She's going to be involved in this movement here in Nashville. And yeah, they're getting themselves arrested. Okay, we're going to see these guys quite a bit, particularly John Lewis. And so, yeah, 80 demonstrators arrested. One of the things that they're going to do is just like make sure that they've got enough. So one group of students, sit-in protesters, gets arrested, and then another one comes in, and then another one comes in. Key thing, write this down. Part of the goal, and they learned this a bit from Gandhi when he was doing protests in the country of India, trying to get independence from Britain. You get lots and lots of protesters, and then they get arrested, and then more get arrested, and then more get arrested. You get so many that you don't even have jail space. Even when you're cramming them in there, you have to eventually let them go. And that's kind of a victory for the protesters. At least that's something that the people who are going to try and jail them have to consider. So you just bring it, and then keep the behavior, no hitting back. And that's a key thing going on there. The other thing that the students are trying to do, of course, is to get support from the community. Now, the community, older people, older African Americans, you know, raised during the time are like, you know, we don't like segregation, we don't like these things, but, you know, we have to do this gradually, or I don't know, maybe now is the time, maybe no more waiting. I mean, that's the thing. These events that came out of the 1950s with Brown versus Board of Education and the Emmett Till case and the Montgomery bus boycott, right? And then, you know, you got this situation in Mississippi and Alabama and so forth, where the students are getting in to college. There's a real sense of like, now is the time. So another thing, write this down. You get a real effort on the part of young people and others that form up, you know, an ongoing thing. Like right here, you see the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They're going to be, SNCC is what they're referred to. They're going to be working with folks in Nashville to put more pressure on the businesses and the political leaders of Nashville to change things. One of the methods, you've seen it before, is boycott. You saw this in Montgomery. Put this down. You see a boycott of Nashville downtown businesses, these same businesses and stores that have these lunch counters, basically African Americans saying, you know, we're not going to buy stuff from these folks anymore until they change their policies. Well, I mean, what kind of a hit is that? Well, it could be a pretty sizable hit, because after a while in Nashville, the downtown stores are like, people aren't going there. African Americans aren't going there. Because they're, you know, coming together and boycotting, and then a lot of whites aren't going there because they're afraid that like there's going to be, you know, protests and maybe violence and stuff. So a lot of this, and of course, the attention that is being drawn to it is sparking more sit-in protests. I want to say like between up to 69 other cities in the South are having these protests. Over 2,000 people arrested at these sit-ins. The boycott is starting to prove effective. You know, of course, if you're just an African American going downtown in Nashville, and all of a sudden these whites see you and they start beating you up, and you're like, I haven't been trained by James Lawson. I'm going to hit you back, and it's like, what a mess. And then, of course, you get the things, and we've seen this before: violence against the leaders. Right? April 19, 1960. During this 1960 year of protest, you have a home of one of the black activists and city council members destroyed in Tennessee by people who do not want to have these changes. And then you get these organizations, very interesting in Nashville. Put this down. They organize a mass march. This is going to be a very interesting thing. Over 4,000 African American and others will protest. They will march in Nashville. Peaceful assembly. They can do this. And it's very interesting because, as you'll see in the film, this particular strategy is not to be shouting out all kinds of various different slogans and so forth. This one's going to be a very quiet march. And they're going to march all the way to City Hall. What are they expecting? Well, they actually have sized up the leader right there, the mayor of Nashville, Ben West. This is an interesting thing. Write his name down. He is a white American. And he's actually comes across as a really nice guy. He's pretty reasonable. You know, can he be worked with? You know, can he, you know, act as a go-between to make some changes in the laws and so forth? One of the things, you know, when the protesters arrive at the city hall, there's no guarantee that they're going to see the mayor. The mayor comes out. You can see the picture right there. There's the mayor. He's coming out here, and he's talking with the protest leaders, and the protesters are being very, you know, kind and patient, but emphatic on what it is they want. And there's Diane Nash, young college student, one of the sit-in protesters and so forth, and she's in this march, and you'll see in the film, she asks him, you know, what do you think of treating whites and blacks differently as a man, as a human? What do you think? They are able to size him up as somebody who can be swayed. Watch as we go through the civil rights movement, because sometimes the protesters who are looking for change are going to identify a leader in the white community as somebody who can be swayed and move things their way. Cool. Other times, that won't necessarily be the strategy. As we go forward, we're going to see that sometimes the areas that are going to have the key focus and concentration of protests and marches and so forth is going to be when some of the leaders in the white community are absolute jerks. And you can count on them to be absolute jerks. And when they're absolute jerks, you just make sure you've got enough news media, and you need to make sure you got enough steel, you know, resolve and patience, because public opinion, you're counting on turning against the absolute jerks. Some can be persuaded. Ben West is a good example. As we go forward, there's going to be others you can't persuade, but that's why you identify and you organize protests against them. So keep that in mind as we go along. Okay, so ultimate result in Nashville, success for the for SNCC, for the civil rights leaders. Now coming out of there, we got more success, we got more momentum, And like I say, we've got this new group. I mean, we've got SNCC, students, think of them, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And then, of course, we had previously Martin Luther King Jr. and pastors with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SLIC. Okay, so we got two different groups, and we've got some other ones too. It's just a complicated civil rights movement here. It's not just King gives a speech and everything gets done. No, there's a lot of complexity involved here. And so SNCC will be set up as an independent organization, and they'll participate in various different things as we move forward. And we'll identify which ones are which. Okay, all right. So we're going to turn our attention now into continuing on into 1960, where we have SNCC is organized, right? And you've still got the SCLC with the pastors still moving along. And the attention turns now to Atlanta. This is in the fall of 1960, October 1960. There's Martin Luther King Jr. Getting arrested in Atlanta. And I believe this is also a lunch counter sit-in protest. There's an interesting dynamic that takes place here. King is sentenced to like 4 months in jail. And this is always, you know, is he willing to get arrested? Yes, of course he's willing to get arrested. Is he willing to go to jail? He is, although it's a little bit harder to organize some things when you're in jail. Something very interesting, make sure you write this down. October 1960, it's the fall of a presidential election year, right? Just like up this coming fall is going to be the fall of a presidential election year. We've already identified in the year 2020, we've got Trump, the Republican nominee for the, you know, on the one side, running for re-election. And then we've got Joe Biden, who looks to be the Democratic nominee. In 1960, Dwight D. Eisenhower was the president, right? We've seen Dwight D. Eisenhower. He was the one who sent in the troops, the 101st Airborne, to make sure that Little Rock Central High School was going to be open. But he can't run again. So his vice president, Richard Nixon, ends up being the Republican nominee. And the Democratic nominee is John F. Kennedy, all right? And John F. Kennedy, of course, it's a very interesting thing because John F. Kennedy, you know, is he for civil rights? Sure. What about Richard Nixon? Sure. And actually, the African-American community is pretty split because, I mean, when you think about it, in 1960, you know, which is the political party of, I don't know, getting rid of slavery? And Abraham Lincoln, well, that's the Republicans. And Dwight D. Eisenhower had stepped up, you know. But what about the Democrats? You know, would John F. Kennedy need the votes of Southern Democrats to make sure that, you know, that he's going to have a winning coalition? It's a very, very, very close race. An interesting thing happens here. Not that there are very many African-American people in the Deep South that are able to vote. We'll see that's obviously a big, big problem. But in some of the border states and other parts of the country, African-Americans are looking as a sense of, you know, who to vote for. You know, you got a lot of African-Americans living in places like Chicago and Detroit, other parts of the country. And this is where it gets interesting. Put this down. The judge in Martin Luther King's case, where he's been sentenced for 4 years, the judge gets a call from Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, and persuades the judge to let King go. There you go. King is released right before the election in early November, first week of November. Nixon didn't get involved. The word gets out to the African-American community. I think maybe this Kennedy is something good in a very, very close race. You can see it right there. Kennedy wins. He wins Illinois. He wins some other big, close states. And there's an expectation. Make sure you write this down. There's really an expectation in the African-American community that Kennedy is trying to get the support of the African-American community, and that the African-American community, now that Kennedy's been elected, can count on him to bring change now that he is in power, beginning in January 1961. So one of the things that the African-American community is like saying, okay, Kennedy, let's get cracking on here. You know, let's move things forward. And of course, Kennedy's like, you know, is he all talk? Well, let's write this down. James Farmer, who is the head of another civil rights organization, it's called the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE. You'll hear him, he's pretty critical of Kennedy. He's like, Kennedy, you're all talk and no action. I mean, come on. snap, you can get rid of, with federal authority, you can get rid of all that segregation that's going on interstate buses, you know, buses that are going from one state to another. You can do it. You're the president. Come on, do it. So you're going to see some tension. Put this down. You're going to see some tension because presidents have got all their agenda of what they want to do and so forth. And the civil rights leaders have got their agenda and they want to move things forward in a way that they can get things accomplished. And so sometimes the president could go, slow down here a little bit, just slow down. And African American civil rights leaders are going to go, no, we told her wait long enough. We're going to move forward. And that's the situation as we move into 1961. CORE, along with SNCC, the student leaders, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, are going to organize the Freedom Rides, okay? And they're going to put pressure on everybody, on the country. Because what they want to do is they want to get into some buses right here in Washington, D.C., and take these buses, Greyhound buses, because they're one of the big bus line companies, and just go in the bus, head down into the South. I mean, what's the big deal with that? Well, the southern states have laws and they have cultural expectations. Blacks right in the back and whites right in the front. And that's the way it is. And what are these guys going to do? Well, you've got whites and blacks as part of the Freedom Rides. These are the Freedom Riders, 1961. And they start out at various different times. You'll have more or less and so forth. They start out with 7 white and 6 black riders, and the blacks right in the front and the whites right in the back. And that's what they're going to do. And they're just going to see how it goes. And it actually goes pretty well because they go through Virginia and into North Carolina and South Carolina, not too much. I mean, they're basically saying to President Kennedy, there could be some problems here because we're getting threats and you need to provide some protection. Because we're just following the law. The law says you can't have these things. You need to provide us some protection. Is it going to work out okay? I don't know. As they go into Georgia, I don't know, as they head deeper into the South, is the potential threat go up? Yeah. Oh, here they are. They got the signs, hanging out the windows, all smiles and everything. People are like, okay, well, that's fine, cool, and everything and so forth. I don't know, are they going to get the attention of some Southern groups and stuff? Can you think of any? Can you think of the initials of any groups that are going to be like, we're not going to let that happen in our state? Okay. Yeah, there we go. As they enter into Alabama, into the state of Alabama, this is in May of 1961. A mob meets the bus and firebombs it. 12 riders are hospitalized. No protection whatsoever. Not local law protection. There's not state law protection, and there's not federal law protection. This is the bus, right? And so Greyhound bus is like, we're not going to ride anymore. And, we're just not going to, we lost a bus here. We don't lose any drivers, and this is not good for business. And oh my gosh, they're using our buses as a form of their protest. So now things get very interesting, right? Because here you've got, okay, take a look right here. You got 2 people on either side here. On the left, you have the Alabama governor at the time. This is before George Wallace comes in. It's John Patterson, Democrat, and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, and he's the head of the Justice Department, right? And Robert F. Kennedy's like, this is state responsibility for security. This is a state responsibility. Come on, Governor, you need to provide some protection for these protesters who were coming into your state where there is a known danger. And, Patterson's like, I don't want to get provided, babysitting for these protesters or just troublemakers, and they should just leave, right? So, I mean, like, what's going to happen as they're in? So, look, we're in Alabama, right? So here we are. They've entered into Alabama, and they're have arrived at Birmingham, and they're going to be driving on another bus heading to Montgomery, which is the capital city. And they continue on into Mississippi and so forth, and I guess ostensibly down into Louisiana. So there's a real question, what's going to happen as that bus goes from Birmingham south toward Montgomery? Is there going to be protection? Patterson's like, I don't think so. I don't know what's going to happen. Well, when the bus arrives, there is a big crowd in Montgomery, and they take matters into their own hands. And it is ugly. See right here? There's no protection. Not along the way, and certainly not when they arrive at the bus terminal. It's not like these guys are arrested. These guys, the protesters, the Freedom Riders, are beaten up. There's John Lewis. He gets beaten up very badly. There's Jim Zwerg, one of the white Freedom Riders. He's smacked up left, right, and center. He's ended up in the hospital. You know, Frederick Leonard and others, write his name down too. He's one of the African-American protesters as part of the Freedom Rides. And, you know, this is just like bad, right? Very, very bad. And of course, the pressure then is put on both Kennedy and Patterson. Kennedy, on behalf of the United States of America. Will the United States of America provide law enforcement protection where none is? I mean, we've seen this happen before. When the Little Rock students showed up and there was no protection for them, President Eisenhower ultimately sent in troops to make sure that they were safe. Right? When James Meredith was trying to go to the University of Mississippi and was getting all kinds of problems from the state government there, President Kennedy sent in the U.S. Marshals to make sure that he could enroll, and then was able to actually attend campus safely. So what do you think is going to happen here? Well, you're going to have marshals, right? Actually, it's very interesting because before we find out that the marshals come in, here comes Martin Luther King. He's like, yes, we support this protest. We support CORE and we support SNCC. And he comes to the, yep, there you go, at a church, First Baptist Church, and he's giving a speech, right? There's, you can see with the stitches on the back of his head. John Lewis had just been smacked upside the head when he came into Montgomery. And, you know, they're talking to the news media, and there's a lot of public attention to this. And I mean, foreign news media too. I mean, the United States is like, you know, we're a great country, democracy and freedom and rights and everything. But they're playing these kinds of stories in places like the Soviet Union. Oh, really? This is how you treat your African Americans and so forth when they ride on a bus and get off? What the heck? There's a mob right outside of the church on the evening Martin Luther King Jr. is speaking. And Bobby Kennedy is like, Patterson, you need to provide some people to support. And Patterson's like, I don't want to do that. You know, get the federal marshals in here and so forth. I mean, eventually you will have federal marshals. There'll be 600 U.S. marshals showing up to provide some protection. But at the same time, and here's a victory for the Freedom Riders, they get a guarantee of state Guard, state National Guard units. Finally, Patterson backs down, and he will provide protection for the Freedom Riders as they continue on their way from Alabama all the way into Mississippi, to the capital city, Jackson, Mississippi. And so that part is actually very safe, right? May 24th, 1961. They leave the Montgomery bus terminal safe and sound. There's National Guard protection for the Freedom Riders as they leave the state of Alabama, and then you got the Mississippi National Guard that kind of picks it up from there, and they arrive in Jackson, Mississippi, and they walk into the terminal, you know, the white section and the black section, and of course they go to the white section because, you know, that they're making a point. And as they get to the white section, they all get arrested because, I mean, that hasn't been fixed yet. Will it get fixed? I mean, give me a break. And they go to prison. I mean, 60 days in the state penitentiary. These Freedom Riders right here, and you'll hear Frederick Leonard, make sure you write his account down, about what it's like to be in the state penitentiary. I mean, not just putting them into like a local jail, they set them in the state pen. And man, oh man, they're willing to do it in order to put pressure on the folks that have put these laws in place. And one of the biggest pressures they're putting on ultimately is going back to the President of the United States. He said that he could get the Interstate Commerce Commission, a federal commission, a federal regulatory commission, to get rid of segregation in interstate buses and interstate terminals, bus terminals. Will they do it? Yes, right? By the fall of 1961, the Interstate Commerce Commission released the federal regulations, you see right there, to desegregate transportation facilities. They did it, finally. Pressure here, pressure there, they held together. But this is dangerous stuff because, I mean, you got mobs, you got people getting beaten up. I mean, you hit somebody in the head the wrong way, you can kill them. And nobody was killed in this particular instance, but as long as you got folks that are still trying to do that, it's going to be dangerous going on out. So there we go. Oh, we'll get to George Wallace on our next episode. So I want you guys to make sure you watch the full episode. I've given you the notes pretty well here on this episode. Watch the full episode and yeah, make sure to do the attendance question. Okay. All right. Signing out. See you guys.